What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Couple Things Interviews.
With Shawn and Andrew.
Today, we have a wonderful guest, Jeremy Pryor.
I came across Jeremy's work about 2 years ago now when my brother Guy and I started navigating what it means to have a family legacy. Mm-hmm. We started kind of taking the reins of leading not just our own immediate families, but our extended family. And it's been a really fun project. And Jeremy has contributed a lot in this space, and he talks about families. He wrote a book called Family Revision, among other books. He creates a lot of videos on this topic and really is a thought leader in this regard. But he's a partner at FamilyTeams. He's a director at 1kh.org, president of Third Generation Properties, and author of Family Revision, How Ancient Wisdom Heals a Modern Family. They host these wonderful conferences in Cincinnati where my brother has attended frequently, and it's kind of just a workshop on what it means to have a meaningful family. And today's conversation was really fun. We dug into some good stuff. And did you have any takeaways?
We talk about multi-generational living, all of the traditions that he's implemented within his family that he believes will have a lasting legacy, how to build what he calls your family team. Just a lot of really great takeaways, how to unite your family as a whole.
What excites me about this is I heard someone once challenge men to spend as much time strategically building their family as they strategically build their careers and businesses. And I think Jeremy has helped me navigate doing that, focusing that energy, knowing what that even means. So thank you, Jeremy, for joining us. If you want to find out more about Jeremy and what he's up to, we'll include his information down below. But without further ado, we bring you Jeremy Pryor. Jeremy Pryor, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. I'm really excited because I've read through several of your books, and you have sparked this curiosity about families and what they could look like, and I'm excited to dig in that today. So thanks for joining.
Awesome. Yeah, so good to be here with you guys.
All right, so you are the family culture guru, all right? And I'm curious first, maybe we could start and talk about what got you into this topic.
Yeah, I would say that I am so interested in this topic, not because I always was excited someday to be a dad or a father. I kind of came into this fairly reluctantly, and I assumed, and I grew up in the Seattle area, I saw so much brokenness that came to family that I really had kind of an attitude as a young single guy, just of I don't know if this thing works. I don't know if I want to have kids. I was a youth pastor in a culture where there was just so much brokenness in family, and my family I grew up in was great, but there was just so much brokenness around us that I just lost a lot of hope. And I had then gone to Israel for just a semester abroad. I was there to study Hebrew. I was obsessed with the Old Testament. I was much more interested in these kind of deep theological questions than necessarily real practical ones like the family. But I just kept on running into this scene of fathers and children. It was so predictable. And I remember one day I was just sitting on a bench in Jerusalem and saw a whole group of fathers pushing strollers with all their little kids in tow. And I was just like, why are they doing that? Why are these dads so into being fathers? So I started doing a deep dive because I was super into theology. I just wanted to understand the why behind it. And as I was talking to different Jewish fathers, they just kept on referencing Abraham as being the reason that they wanted to have children. And I was like, that is so weird. Abraham's in our Bible, but I never, ever imagined that in studying Abraham, I would find a motivation for being a father or having a multi-generational family. So I started to go deeper into the lens that they see family through. And I was sort of shocked that it's like putting on a pair of glasses and then suddenly you see these things. And I saw what these dads were seeing. And it was so dramatic for me. It was like somebody just flipped a switch. And I went from somebody who, I don't know if I want to have kids, they seem to get in your way, to I just want to be a dad. I want to build a multi-generational family. I want to be a grandfather and a great grandfather. It's just all of these Abrahamic desires. And I saw and I experienced what these fathers saw and experienced. So that was, I'm 50 now, so I was 23 then. So it's been a journey. We now have 5 kids, and but that was really the catalyst that sort of flipped my perspective.
I'm curious if you contrast that dads with the stroller scene with what
Yeah.
you are more familiar with here in the Western and in the U.S. culture. Describe the difference.
Yeah. So in a Western context, the father is probably, in most cases, the one who's least interested in the family. The family is a almost essentially almost a maternal entity, right? And that the dad sort of orbits around in a lot of cases. And so you have oftentimes, and that's why I think we love using this analogy of the nest. So that's kind of what the family in a Western context is a lot like. In the Middle East, the person who's probably most likely to be passionate about the family is the father. They see themselves as a part of a family line, and that their grandfather handed something to their father is handing something to them, they're going to hand something to their son, and their son's going to hand something to their grandson. So that's the sort of the patrilineal line of the family. They're hyper aware of it, and they feel a deep sense of personal identity with it. And so as they believe that's the essence of the family, they really everything else sort of fuels the family. So their work exists not as a pursuit of some kind of individual identity, but it's a way in which they can provide for their family. They think about their family in completely different terms.
Help cast the vision for me. So the intergenerational aspect of it. You mentioned this idea of handing something down. What
Yes.
exactly, like paint the vision for what an intergenerational kind of that Abrahamic family looks like.
Yeah. So an Abrahamic family, it starts where when you're born into this family, you don't feel like your story just started. You believe that you're a part of something that precedes you, and your identity is rooted in that larger family story. And so you see yourself primarily not just as an individual. You are an individual, that's one of your identities, but your family identity as a son or a daughter, future as a father or mother, eventually as a patriarch or matriarch. These things are the elements of your life that provide sort of maximum meaning. And so you see yourself primarily from that perspective. And so the stories of your ancestors are very important to you. And your thoughts about what you're passing on to your future descendants is really motivating so much of your work, your action. Even your faith is deeply rooted in what came before you and what you have the opportunity to pass on. And so it's where you find just the grounding of your meaning, and your identity. So we live in a culture that sort of like everybody starts very much like as a blank slate. Like if people say, "Tell me your story," if you go back very far, it'll be like, "Well, I was born, on this day and in this area of the country." And so you tell your story very much as an individual. You're not telling like this generational family story. Your story started with you and it's going to end with you. Like your life is essentially a single player game. And that kind of hyper individualism is extremely recent, and it's very, very historically unusual. If you thought this way in most parts of the world or most times in history, you wouldn't survive. But we live in a culture that is unusually safe and prosperous for the individual to completely jettison the past and live for themselves alone. That's a very unusual situation to find ourselves in. So we do have the option. We do have the option to say, I want to primarily think of myself as an individual, and I want that to be the center around which all of my identities really orbit. But is that the way that God, and this is what really got me as somebody who really is interested in kind of first principles and what does the Bible say about this, and what's a God's eye view of family like? As I started diving deeper into that question, does God primarily see us as individuals? And why did he start the family? Why did he create the pairing of male and female? Why does he give us the ability to reproduce children? And how does he conceptualize this? And you have on the very, very first page of the Bible, God describing and actually proclaiming the mission statement of the family. When he creates the first family, he says he blesses them and says to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill, subdue, and rule over all creation. So this 5-part mission, he has that sort of pre-existed the family. He then created this unit in which it had this purpose, this clear meaning, and that meaning, the purpose, the mission statement he gave it, it can only be accomplished through a multi-generational effort, right? You can't fill, subdue, and rule the earth as just Adam and Eve. Like, that's not possible. Clearly, that's why it started with be fruitful and multiply. They had to have children, and they had to build out this family line in order for them to accomplish the mission God gave. And so the family essentially is a team. They're designed to work together to accomplish this mission. He didn't give this to just the man or just the woman. He gave it to them. So he makes them a team. Then he gives them a mission that is multi-generational, and that mission is what they're designed to do from the beginning. So that's a very different way of viewing family. We don't think about family that way hardly at all in the West. Again, the family in the West, the best way I think of to describe the way we see family is a springboard for individual success. A really good family is one in which you kind of have this sort of center of nurturing where you feel like you belong, but its design is to launch you out. And so fathers and mothers who have done their job the best, they're kind of graded based on how well are the individuals in the family flourishing, and so it's all based on their individual action. And that's why the nest is a perfect example, because the nest is really only there for a very temporary period of time. It sort of self-destructs. All the chickies fly away. Everyone goes and does what they goes and lives their life independently, and the whole thing starts over again. So that's one way to conceptualize the family. It's a very recent and a very modern way of thinking about family life. The problem is it doesn't seem like it works. I mean, it breaks down spectacularly. Like, we have a crisis that is really difficult to even quantify. The United States in the last 2 years, the number one country in the world of single parent households. So we have more single parent families in the United States, it's just specifically our country, than any country in the world. So we live and exist at ground zero of the destruction of the family. And so one of the things we have
But what's the problem? Sell me on the problem of that. Why is that an issue?
Because
let's zoom in a little bit.
Yeah. So it doesn't appear that children were designed to be raised by a single parent. It's a really difficult tragedy. Recently, there was a report that was released that kind of shocked the internet. This report went viral just like 2 weeks ago, and basically they asked, what was the single greatest predictor of a good mother? And so everyone listed their ideas, what they thought the greatest predictor was. And they said, well, we know what the single greatest predictor of being a good mother is, and it is a supportive partner. In other words, like, it's incredibly difficult, like, to be a single mother or a single father. We were not designed to raise our families alone. And I would say the same is true even for an intact nuclear family where there's a husband and a wife. I don't think that they were designed to raise their family alone. I think that they were supposed to be nested inside of a larger extended family unit. And this is what you see in other cultures. Like probably an example of a culture where there's a lot of intact extended family support is in the country of India. So in India, the divorce rate is 1.1%. I mean, a tiny, tiny infinitesimal fraction of what it is in our culture. Now, they've held on to a much more classical view of the family and of marriage. But what we've decided as a culture is, again, we've sort of adopted the idea that the individual is the most important thing in all of society, that all identity should be rooted in the individual. And this makes family life extraordinarily difficult. We absolutely rebuff the idea of roles in the family. The idea of the permanence of the covenant. All of these things are really, really hard on us culturally because we've adopted the free expression, individual self-expression as being our highest value. And there's no question that family and marriage collide in major ways with that value.
I feel like there's so many things that you've said where I'm like, yeah, I've actually felt that. I've seen that. I do feel like, especially in culture today in the Western world, even having gone through, we have 3 babies. We have a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 10-month-old. With every pregnancy, I felt that. It's almost like it's not cool. It's looked down upon. It's seen as a weakness if you have help with the family, if you're living with your family, if they're close. In-laws are villainized anymore in our
Right.
culture. It's not cool to be dependent on your family in any way, shape, or form. It's almost like our culture puts up on a pedestal the single mothers, the single fathers, because they're the strongest out there. When, like you're saying, it's actually it's been made biblically to be a community project, where
Right.
our world, I feel like, is more and more saying, no, you shouldn't have community. That's actually a weakness of yours, that you need it.
Right. Yes. Yeah. The David Brooks, on one of his books, he wrote that when Americans become wealthy, they purchase loneliness. And I was like,
So
once I read that,
true.
I was like, that perfectly describes, what you're saying, Shawn, and that is that there, because we've made um, building everything around our individual preferences basically our God. Then when you get more power, more freedom, and more wealth, you move you move your lifestyle increasingly into greater and greater isolation. Um,
Mm.
Now, it's not hard to understand why that collides with family life. Family life is all about compromise. It is all about choosing to exist within pre-existing roles that allow for the flourishing of children, and a flourishing of your spouse as well as yourself. And so, cultures that embrace these ideas, they tend to have thriving families. But the idea of the functional family in our culture is almost a punchline. It's like it's so rare that people are opting out of family and out of marriage, in general, left and right, because they're saying it's just a bad bet. The percentage of times this breaks down, even if you somehow get past the 50% divorce rate, the other 50% of people who are staying married, what percentage of them are actually flourishing? And so you just get into a smaller and smaller and smaller subset of people who are functioning. And I think that one of the things we have to do is take a giant step back and say, okay, it's important to admit that we have experimented with this thing called the family in so many major ways, and some of these experiments have gone terribly wrong. But because they do all tend to be within the trajectory of greater individual freedom, we refuse to question these experiments. And so I don't think that the family is inherently dysfunctional. I think it's an incredibly beautiful design. I think it's centered on love. The idea of a father and mother, son and daughter, these are incredibly beautiful identities, and they're designed to create flourishing for ourselves and our families. But they do at times collide with our individual self-expression. And in our culture, we're taught that when that collision occurs, always go with the individual, and that will kill any family.
So connect well-defined family roles to family flourishing, and not freedom, and also differentiate freedom from flourishing for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, those are difficult, again, in our context today to really embrace. But so I would start here, just talking about myself personally. So there are things as an individual that I know are true about myself, preferences I have, or ways of thinking, or temperaments, or things. And so I have all of those elements of my personality and my preferences. And then I look at this role called fatherhood. All the roles and responsibilities of fatherhood, what it means to, provide for my family, what it means to protect my daughters, what it means to love my wife, what it means to build a flourishing family. And there's not actually a ton of overlap between those two things in my life personally. Like I could describe for you who I would be, in my personality and my preferences. Like I'm the guy who I would love to be totally independent. Like I love to think. I would probably be playing like lots of video games. I mean, I'd look at who I was when I was single, the kinds of things that I was into. I mean, the idea that I could live in a virtual world, and I'm a very abstract thinker. I'm super into sci-fi and fantasy. I mean, the world in which I could have existed in, or even attempted to exist in as a single person, is not very compatible with the responsibilities of fatherhood. And so I looked at these two realities and said, okay, this is what I really want in my personality, my preferences, and this is what this role really entails. Now, one of the problems that I had was this role of father. has been really deeply corrupted culturally. So, I looked at a lot of, popular depictions of fatherhood, and they were sort of like a punchline or a joke or whatever. It took me a long time to actually distill and try to understand, what does the Bible say about fatherhood? What are really healthy, good depictions of fatherhood? And so what I had to choose to do was say, okay, I decided to invest in this thing called the family. I'm going to begin to say no to a lot of my personal preferences and try to inhabit this role of father for the sake of my wife and my children and my future grandchildren. I will try to do a good job. And that doesn't mean repressing every element of my personality. It doesn't mean repressing every part of my preferences. It does mean that I need to become aware of the collision between these two worlds. And I need to do a lot of choosing this fathering role when they collide. And so there's certainly a negotiation there. And there's elements where I don't lose myself, but I have sacrificed a lot of elements of my own preferences to this role of being a father. So I would say that's at the micro level.
Why is it worth it? What's the payoff?
Well, the payoff is
I'm trying to get very finite and tangible here, because
yes,
I mean, it's actually background on us. I am just kind of coming to the realization at how incredible my family, not just nuclear family growing up, but like my cousins, my grandpa, we used to have these family reunions and second cousins, and we're talking about family history. It's one of those things that it's like, whatever, you're 12, you think everybody does it. And then we lost my father almost 2 years ago, and it's like it was this real step back moment of, oh, this doesn't just get handed to you. All these things that he did, we would go home for the holidays, even to like up to 2 years ago, he would have a whole list of activities, conversation topics. What are we going to sit down and talk about as a family at the dinner table? Very intentional. And so it was in that process that I really kind of like saw the light. Yes. And then also, people talk about legacy being so much more than like financial, and you're like, okay, well, what does that look like? And I've been working on this project for the last 2 years of trying to like, okay, if I do plan on giving our kids some sort of resources, financials being one of them, which I think can be really powerful. You look at like the Medici family, the Rockefeller family, even like the Kennedys. It's like, what is it? Or like the Mannings. It's like, what is it about a family that these are like these icons in different areas? It's like, clearly there's something there.
Yes.
How can I give them, how can I equip them with the values, the history, the knowledge that I had instilled in me? Just like, it's almost like a slow drip each and every day for days, weeks, and months and years of growing up. Anyway, I've put together this like family culture. I call it the family culture starter pack, which it's like all of these things of the songs we sing. Like our kids, when we go to school every day, will sing, "We are the East, the mighty, mighty East." And all their cousins do it too. So they get together and they all kind of know. And it's like, awesome. That's like a small piece of it. What are our daily affirmations? We're talking about the family tree and everything in it is certainly part of it. But even like from a health and wellness standpoint, I'm into CrossFit, and they have this like assault bike, and I realized I kind of thought I was this new novel gift to the earth, and it's like there's never been an Andrew, and there never will be again. And I have all these interests, and then it's like, come to find out, my grandpa, who was born in 1920 whatever, used to ride the old Schwinn bike back every day for 15 minutes, which is pretty much CrossFit, pretty much is the old version of what I'm doing now. It's like, no, this is just, I'm a different vintage of pretty much what's been around. But what are all of my mom's family has this like classic little like hip problem. They all have this same little limp, and it's like, oh man, okay, so that gets carried through, obviously. Yep. But what about, what are the good things that get carried through? What are the professions that have been in our lineage, so that, when our kids are exploring, it's like, man, here's a trend line. 80% of our people were teachers, or, we have a high percentage of entrepreneurs. Maybe I have what it takes to like, whatever it is, it's like a launching pad of all this information. I'm trying to just like document this. I have this, I think it's 90 pages right now with table of content and all this stuff. But it's like, I guess I'm trying to fight back personally this impulse I have to be a rogue individualist. And it's like, I kind of view myself as like the guy who goes off into the woods and comes back 3 years later with a beard and like an elk on his shoulder. And like, that's kind of,
Yes.
that's kind of like how I,
yes.
yeah. But then, and that's why I'm trying to ask all these like really
Yes.
tangible questions, because it does not really come naturally to me nor to many of my peers. And I think as I've dug into some biblical concepts, even like the Trinity, it's like community is at the very core of that concept, where you have like this trio that is supportive and complementary. And then it's like even the parallel to we're made in God's image, and like the closest thing we have to that is having kids that are in our image. And it's like, okay, wow, this is super. So community is at the core of us too. How can we unlock that? And whatever, we're in a space too where it's like all these entrepreneurial gurus are like, yo, go make $1 million, go get, 6-pack abs and sell your business, whatever it looks like. And I'm like, no, that is uncomfortable. That's difficult, but try to raise a family and have kids screaming. Like, that's uncomfortable. That's worse than your 4 a.m. ice bath. It's like, this is the penultimate self-improvement. Like, whatever you're looking at, my wife is this daily mirror to my imperfections. God bless your soul. I'm ranting right now. Shawn gets all weird when I go on a rant like this. So anyway, why is it worth it to you to make the sacrifice of those personal preferences for the family?
Yeah, man. Well, there's certainly layers to the reason. I think one of them is we were not designed to live alone. We were not designed to live a single player game. This isn't a single player game. Like, we were born into families. We live our life through family, and we're going to die surrounded by our family, God willing. And that's the way God designed it. But I think that we have a loneliness epidemic that's erupting in society because we have lied to so many young men and women about the way this works, about that you have to actually sacrifice part of your individual self in order for you to have the most deep and meaningful relationships. And so we're really presenting a pathway to loneliness. And the scriptures actually say God places the lonely in families. That's a verse from the Psalms. And so we already have the solution to that. People are talking about, oh, we need community, and we need to live in the city, and we need more friendships, friends, because everybody's so starved for relationship, because we've already shot in the head the one structure that was designed to actually provide the most meaningful relationships in our lives. We don't know how it works. We're not willing to make the kind of compromises. How are you ever going to be the kind of person who could have a meaningful business partnership or friendship if you can't even be a husband and wife, a son or a daughter? So that's the first layer, is that we're just designed for this thing. Like you said, even God himself exists in a community. I think the second reason that for me really, really gets me is meaning. So if life is about happiness or the pursuit of happiness, and by that we just sort of mean the ability to indulge our individual preferences or impulsive pleasure, then of course there's nothing that's going to disrupt that more than family. But if we're really designed for meaning, and that happiness is really a byproduct of experiences of meaning, you're not going to find a pathway that's more reliably going to create more moments of meaning than investing in your family relationships. Like you're describing, Andrew, about your dad. I mean, it's like those memories and that connection, there's nothing like that. And if you decide to sacrifice that or not build that or not participate in that because it's going to interfere with your individual preferences, that's going to be a really smart short-term decision for your individual and maybe immediate happiness, and it's going to come at an enormous long-term cost. And this is why we're going to have this epidemic of people just dying alone that has never been seen historically before. But this is the fruit of that. And one of the examples in our family is we do this this multi-generational family kind of Sabbath dinner every week. And so there's about 15 to 20 people in our different extended family members come to this meal every week. And my wife's father, my father-in-law, he was able to come to this meal. We had started inviting them about 2 or 3 years before he passed. And I remember, he would come, he loved that so much. And he would come every Friday night to this meal. And there was a predictable moment in every one of these dinners where he would be talking and then just would tear up and couldn't talk anymore. He was just so moved. And I remember watching this pattern happen week after week. And I was just like, I think I understand what he's feeling. I think he can't get over the fact, now that he's in his 70s, just being surrounded by his children and grandchildren, he gets overwhelmed by the meaning of his life, hearing their stories and understanding that his life is persisting in this way and that he is an integral part of that. He looked like the happiest, most fulfilled person on the planet, getting to just sit and experience this. And that experience of grandfather around the table happiness is not the same as cotton candy happiness. And we've not told people the difference. And there's a Psalm 128 that actually describes the good life. And he says, he kind of begins the psalm by asking, what does it look like for the man who is blessed by the Lord? And then he starts to describing what this life looks like. He says, may your sons be like olive shoots around your table. May your wife be like a fruitful vine. It's really describing a grandfather. It says, may you live to see your children's children. And ancient cultures knew this. And this is why the Bible describes this as the good life. But when I was graduating from high school at my graduation party, somebody actually pulled me aside and said, hey, you're about to go to college. Jeremy, I need you to know something. These are going to be the best years of your life. Like, we've actually told young people that in their years where they have the least amount of responsibility, where they have the most freedom, quote unquote, to indulge their personal preferences, that's the good life. That's the pinnacle of life. And all the rest of their life after that is less valuable, is going to be less important. And that's because we're charting the life around this sort of individual impulsive happiness and not around meaning. Because that's not a time in your life where you're experiencing peak meaning like a grandfather does with his children around a table.
So you're saying the peak is not when you go to the peak of life is not when you go to college at age 18. It's not when you maybe, make it to whatever point in your career at age 40 or 50. It is something that continues to increase and grow each and every year.
It's up and to the right. That's the way God designed it. Now, tragedies can happen. There's always challenges to that. But the basic experience of life was designed to basically exponentially increase the meaning of your life the older you got. As you're seeing more and more of your descendants, more and more of your children, and more of what you've invested your life in just become more fruitful, more meaningful, more relationally connected. Like, to see and live, to see and experience that is so powerful. And so that was sort of the trajectory that every father and mother was aiming at. And every father and mother would train their children, their sons and daughters at a very young age to aim at that. Today, kids have nothing to aim at. Like, they're aiming at their own individual happiness. And they're just all crying out because life's getting worse as the responsibilities mount up, as the relationships fragment because they're obsessed with their own individual happiness. They don't know why life is getting worse. They look at the future and they see that it's going to get exponentially harder as their bodies start to break down and more of their relationships end, and the impermanence of life. They're just like, where do I get meaning? And they're beginning to wake up to the reality that they were told a lie, and they were told a lie. And so part of what we have to do is really begin to warn people, young people that have their whole lives ahead of them, that this is the way life works. If for the vast majority of people, and I do think there are exceptions to everything I'm describing, but for the vast majority of people, 90% plus, this is going to be the best path for them to create a meaningful life. Find a spouse, get married for life, have children, raise your children to want to have children, become a father or mother, embrace those roles, and then train your sons and daughters to be fathers and mothers and embrace those roles and become a grandmother or grandfather. Like, that trajectory that the vast majority of the world understands as being kind of the normal life cycle is still the best shot that most people have at living a meaningful life.
Wow. It's such an unnatural trust exercise for the human brain, though, to say, hey, like you want to be that 70-year-old guy at the table, and it's like if that is the peak of happiness, then if there's anything I've learned in my 33 years of life so far, that also means it's probably the peak, most difficult thing to like
It's hard.
make happen.
Yes.
And I guess it's difficult in the sense that you pretty much just have to trust, like, okay, I'm gonna like just work towards this, and it does feel unnatural for me when I'm in college as an 18-year-old to have that as my aiming point, as opposed to whatever other smorgasbord of options I have in front of me at that age.
Yeah.
It's just kind of tough,
I will say though, I mean, again, I feel like unfortunately a lot of people will rarely feel this or experience it because we live in a world that is broken and people are vying for independence rather than the family life, and people are going the single route and say, I don't want to get married, I don't want to have kids, I want to be estranged from my parents, I want to find friends that are my family and get rid of everything else. But we have seen glimpses of it with our family specifically, but also I always tell people we had the privilege and opportunity to go to Europe this past summer. And one of my favorite experiences was being able to go to Italy with our children and see how the culture as a whole celebrated our family so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people say, well, what do you mean? And I said, it feels like here in America, taking your kids to a restaurant or including them in every daily habit is almost frowned upon. There is a place for children, and there is a place for a family, and there is a place for individuals. But seeing these other cultures around the world who are so seamlessly allowing families to be the normal experience in life everywhere, I don't know how to explain it other than it just felt right. It felt so beautiful to see people smile at that and encourage that to be just how we operated.
Right.
And in moving forward in America and the Western world, how do you foresee like reversing this?
Right.
Well, it is an epidemic.
Yeah. What's really tricky is I think that in some of those ancient cultures, and I share that experience, we've traveled a lot with our 5 kids overseas and saw that a lot. And I think that the unambiguous joy and excitement that people have when they see children, one of the things that represents is a culture that honors its parents. So, and we don't understand the connection between these two things in our culture anymore. So in the 10 Commandments, we're told to honor our father and mother. And then it's the first commandment with the promise that it will go well for you on the earth. And it's a very strange thing for us. Like, why is the Bible so obsessed with how we treat our parents? And what occurs when you have a culture that honors the father and the mother is what it does is it's not just about them. It's about, so that, let's say that's the oldest generation. But what it does is it tells everyone in the previous generations, it causes them to want to become fathers and mothers. It causes them to look forward to this role. Wow, someday, like when you're in a sport and you see somebody like a hero that is really honored and is just crushing it, and you're like, oh man, someday I'm going to be like them. It gives you so much clarity, so much passion. Well, imagine being in a culture in which everyone has grandfathers and grandmothers that they're just like, oh my goodness, I can't wait to someday be like them. But we're taught to do the opposite today. We're taught to rebuke and denigrate our parents. We're the first generations in history that have been raised with like an understanding of modern psychology. And one of the things you learn when you're taking your Psych 101 class in college is that your parents screwed you up. And it's true. Our parents screwed us up. Like all the good things came from our parents, and a lot of the bad things came from our parents. And so how do you respond to that? How do you respond to the fact that, and obviously there's a spectrum. Some people have been abused in terrible ways by their parents. I don't think that the answer is for them to honor their parents. But by and large, most of us have gotten a mixed bag from our parents. Some great things, some challenging things. But one of the things that we're taught culturally is to blame them for the negative things, and to sort of like we weren't really conscious of a lot of the original sacrifices a lot of our parents made. And so there's a sense that so many people today have that their parents just owe them a unpayable debt, and that all the honor and all of the goes one direction, goes towards the children. And it's just the opposite in the Bible. There are more verses in the Torah about caring for parents than caring for children. And I think it creates a certain kind of culture, and when you honor your father and mother. And so that's why, in our culture, in our family's culture, as we've been trying to recover this, I want my kids to be around my parents, my wife's parents. We all had challenges with our families growing up, but we live right now in a 4-generation house. My parents live with us, and then I have a grandson and a granddaughter that live with us. My daughter and son-in-law living with us while they rehab the house across the street. So we have 4 generations living in one house, and we do all kinds of rhythms as a family across these generations. And man, I think it's been fun to watch my kids grow up with such close relationship with their grandparents and now the great grandparents. That all this integration is occurring across the generations. And we have 5 kids, and if I really invested a lot in each of my kids' individual pursuits. I did want them to understand the things that they really liked, and we did invest in them, but we invested in a lot of things as a family as well. But because we were constantly finding new ways to honor their grandparents, all 5 of my kids want to be, parents more than anything else. My son and my 4 daughters, they cannot wait to have children. And to them, the idea of like getting married and having kids right away sounds like the best idea ever, because they were raised in a culture in which, again, if you're in a sport and you see that person, winning the Super Bowl or whatever you're aiming at, it's not hard for you to get excited about the pathway it would take to get to that. But we've sort of inverted that, right? And so when people look upstream, they see, brokenness. They see, maybe their parents just divorced or struggling relationally. And so if they opt out at that point and say, I don't know if this works, I don't know if this is worth it, that has a huge ripple effect culturally. And so I think step one is some generation has got to decide to begin to honor their father and mother and begin to present a new way. And so if you can't do that upstream, then you got to do it downstream. You have to train your kids to honor the father and mother, because part of what you're doing is you're training them to honor the essence of fatherhood and motherhood, not just you as an individual. A lot of people think this is just self-serving. Like that's just dumb. Like you're just doing that because you as an individual want more honor. No. I want my kids to lift up the idea of motherhood and fatherhood as incredibly beautiful, to lift up the idea of being a husband or a wife. Like these are sons and daughters. We also honor every one of our family members as their family role. Like they don't earn their honor, their belonging, or their position in our family. That position was given to them because of who they are. And we want to find ways to constantly do that for each other. But when you do that, not just as an individual and say, well, okay, you're amazing, you did this, I can't believe how good you're working on your instrument. We just constantly are promoting their whatever makes them most unique as an individual, as opposed to their role in the family as being itself worthy of being honored. And your belonging is rooted in that. So that if you decide to, change and you don't want to, play that sport, or you don't want to, participate in that individual activity, it doesn't change your value, because your value is cemented in who you are. And we already know that that's rooted in one of your identities, and that is your family identity. And so I think that's part of what really causes a generation to get so excited to participate and root their identity in their family identity instead of just as an individual.
I'm just thinking of the positive mental health effects that would have if your belonging is not because of X, Y, or Z, but merely if you are born into an environment that you feel belonged in, and that's what you're raised in those crucial developmental years.
Yes.
The effect that would have, it's pretty wild to think about. But I do want to talk about family has unique challenges because of the proximity. There's obviously unique benefits as well because of that. But there can be such intense differences in perspectives, or approaches, or even the kind of stereotype of a crazy aunt. Like when family does get messy,
Yes.
What do you do? Like we're talking about the most utopian idealized family here. There's a lot of people that might want to strive to build that
Right.
at some point, but currently are not in that situation. So what do you do with that mess?
Yeah. Yeah. Every family I've ever seen is broken at lots of levels.
Yeah.
And part of that is because of the way we've talked about family and culturally, but part of that's just because we're humans, and humans, you have the perfect design of family, and humans are sinful and they will make mistakes, and they will persist in doing wrong things, and that will cause a lot of pain and suffering for the people around them. And so that's what I think has created the isolation, that I don't want to be implicated by somebody else's sin or somebody else's brokenness. And so I think that you have to have a lot of grace for a family. If going this path is not going to be easy, you're going to have to choose to forgive each other. You're going to have to learn how to resolve conflict. You're going to have to talk about difficult things. And there will be times where you'll have members of your family that are abusive and that just need to be cut off. Like that's a reality. Like there's no question that there's a level of abuse that's just absolutely intolerable, and you need to separate yourself entirely from that. So I think that, but it's the wisdom to understand, like, how do we hang in there in relationships, assuming that they're not that bad. We do need to learn, and like I said, I think part of what gives you a lot of hope is you're modeling a kind of relational health to your children when they see you try to repair that relationship with that difficult aunt, or try to invite that cousin who otherwise is not that easy to be around. Try to forgive your mother for some of the difficult things that she did in your past. Those are all really difficult things to work out interrelationally, and you need to have a reason that is strong enough. Now, the absolute grounding of my reason for how I treat my family members is because of the gospel. Jesus famously in the Lord's Prayer says, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who have trespassed against us." The word trespass is basically it's the fancy biblical word for like a relational sin. And part of the reason why Jesus wants us to pray that every day is because every day we're going to struggle to forgive people that have committed relational sins against us. And I think that Jesus he is working to create the kind of community that could somehow survive the repeated relational sins that we commit against each other. One of his disciples asked Jesus, like, what's exactly the limit to this? Like, if my brother sins against me, 7 times, do I have to forgive him? There's got to be a limit to this, And Jesus, his response was 70 times 7. And so, yeah, this is tough. And of course, there's a lot of details to that. There's no easy, there's nothing easy about it.
Mm.
But the way that Jesus taught us to do this was to first meditate on how much we've been forgiven, and then to only feel obligated to extend forgiveness to the extent that we've been forgiven. But of course, that's an incredibly great extent, given the fact that our sin actually killed the Son of God. And so I think that people, family members who are saturated in the gospel, have an unusual advantage to stay united through the challenges that we're going to present to each other. And so I always want to start there, like, to whatever extent you can root your family in the gospel. I think that's where we get the primary way to keep these relationships strong across generations and over the decades of time that are going to challenge those relationships.
Mm. I heard someone say, there's the idea of the sins of the father or the sins of the son. And then they said, if generational curses are a thing, so are generational blessings.
Yes.
I just love that. Like, how can I run this relay race and hand the baton off to my kids in a way that's hopefully more blessings than curse?
Yes.
But you're saying the people that are in a messy situation now, it's almost like it's difficult, but an opportunity to become the type of person that can be mature enough to deal with that type of thing. And if, like, the more messy the situation, the more opportunity there is for, like, that display of maturity or the
pathway to spiritual growth is really through how do you resolve relationships that are really challenging. There is no other way. The only other way is isolation. But we can make it a lot worse if we ignore these roles. I think that part of what's really difficult is that forgiveness is one thing. We talked earlier about the importance of roles. The reason why I'm into roles and think that we need to stop making that a dirty word if we really want to see families flourish is because there's just too big of a gap. Family life is very logistically challenging. There's a lot that has to happen. You got to provide a lot of money. You got to provide a lot of care. You've got to constantly think about these different individuals in the family and all the health challenges. I mean, just they come at you one after another. Educational challenges, they're so immense, and that the challenges that parents face when they're trying to raise a family in a healthy way, the spiritual challenges. And so it's really important to if you're always negotiating against your spouse to try to get as much as you can from the family as an individual while giving the least you can, that's not going to work. But that's really the alternative to roles. People don't understand what the alternative is. And this is where a gap widens in these kinds of families. And by a gap, I mean what the father is willing to do is maybe they want to do this 20%. The mother is willing to do this 20%. Well, that leaves 60% left unspoken for. And that's how kids fall through the cracks. There's just way too much going on. You have to figure out how much can I absorb? And part of that means you've got to work through those preferences and actually learn the role. And so in the same way that when you go to, at a sport and you're going out for different positions and you have a coach who's like, okay, you have been doing this, but I think what we really need from you on the team is this role. And you go into a process of training to know how to live that and play that role. You can't just constantly be fighting your coach and say, but that's not how I want to do it. I learned this. No, first you have to understand the role. But one of the things you guys have to understand is that we've destroyed the role of father and mother. Most people don't even know what that role is anymore. I mean, mother's a little bit more biologically clear, but a big part of what I've been writing about the last 2 or 3 years is the kind of historic understanding of fatherhood is almost gone. Most people actually think that the modern father is actually more like the traditional mother than the father. Like there are elements of fatherhood that have almost entirely disappeared from any kind of cultural description. You have to basically read books that are 100 plus years old, read biographies that are old to get a picture of what that fatherhood was like. I'm just using that as an example that because family is not easy, there's a brokenness, there's sin, there's the need to forgive. We can't add to that endless confusion about the nature of these roles. Because that's just that sort of breaks so many families because it's just one too many things to try to recover. And so I think one of the things that the church needs to do and that we as a culture need to try to protect is to describe what fatherhood is and motherhood is in a way that is accurate to the way that they were designed originally by God and accurate to what those roles in the family really require from the man or the woman in the family.
Well, describe what the traditional father is.
Yeah,
give hints.
Yeah, the traditional father was a visionary leader. So he was constantly thinking about where he was going to take the family. And the reason why the father was outside the home, oftentimes learning a trade or trying to figure out how to expand the resources of the family, is because his job was to take the family and it is an expansion role. And so the visionary leader, what you see is, and I think probably the best example I've ever seen of a modern depiction of fatherhood is the sports coach. Like all the things that I see a coach doing, like just watching a guy like Deion Sanders, they're like it's like a clinic for fatherhood for me. It's so healing to my soul to watch these men and how they all the things they have to do in planning for the team, bringing the team together, like pitching the vision. We're going to win this championship. This is what it's going to look like. Making the very difficult decisions that you have to make as a head coach about I think that was almost identical to the way that ancient fathers used to live. They would have all these players, which were their children and their employees that worked in the family business. And the father was the coach, and he was constantly coaching each member of the family, helping them work together as a team. But he was ultimately responsible for what happened. If they lost the game, it was his fault. Like, he had to take that hit personally, and he was given a lot of authority because of that. And so every father would act this way overnight if there was real survival at stake and their families were being destroyed because of a constant wave of tragedies. But this is the way most people used to live in ancient times: famines, wars, so many like pandemics. There were so many unpredictable waves of attack that were going to hit their family, and they all knew that they were coming. That every father had to really steel himself to lead the family properly. And so, again, because we live in this weird age that sociologists call the assumption of stability, we live in this time period in which people don't feel like they need a father like that. That's just patriarchal. Like, that guy he's just trying to grab power because he just wants his personal preferences to rule the family. And that actually is accurate for so many modern dads who think this way, because they don't actually feel those threats coming. They're not actually trying to lead their family towards these great opportunities in this amazing future. They really are just trying to live a lifestyle of personal preference, pandering. And so it's not inappropriate for a father that actually only cares about his personal preferences to take that kind of leadership in a family, because that's not what it's for. It's for what I described. It's to take the family through really difficult situations and into amazing opportunities. And so we need that kind of father to reemerge. We need to be training fathers to be like those head coaches, but they have to understand that they've got a team, and their job is to coach their team into victory, and that requires them to dig deep into everything God's made a man to be. And it's not just, give your family a decent life and think about your own individual preferences. That is not a kind of compelling vision that's going to cohere a family around a vision.
It does seem like a subtle difference that makes all the difference. The contrast between like a businessman who comes home to his family and all the responsibilities at home are a threat to his kind of personal goals, versus the family man who goes out to business and the responsibilities at home actually equip him and prepare him
Yes.
for, and it's like the motivation is so much greater
Yes.
with the family man going out to do business and do that well and to excel there
Yes.
than it is for the first case. I'm curious though, because Shawn and I have this conversation all the time. How do you balance the personal versus the familial, specifically, I guess, the friends versus the family? It's like, oh, I feel like we have been so well equipped by our parents to go do amazing things. Shawn's done amazing things. We have these incredible opportunities, and like we try to weigh them well and approach them with discernment. But it's like, but we're also 4 hours away from our family, and we have been, and there's this tension there. Fortunately, Shawn's parents live literally 2 minutes away from us. She grew up an only child. I'm the middle of 5. Everyone's in Indianapolis, and it's like, oh, in some ways, I want to use this term lightly. I'm actually curious to get your perspective. It's like, it's almost like our calling to be down here. It feels like, because there's like, it just feels like this is a good spot for us to be. I just don't know what the tension is, dude. It's like this weird line to walk on.
Yeah, it is. I think it's important to always start from where you are. One of the things that Paul actually says in 1 Corinthians 7 is everyone should remain in the situation in which he was called. Like, don't assume that the answer is to upheaval. But I do think that as your values start to shift, if that itself really causes you to decide to make certain shifts, then that's I would pay attention to that. But
Wait, you're saying I've entertained my personal preferences so long, now my values have changed from what I grew up on, and now I'm making totally different decisions.
Well, I think you have to pay attention to what your values are. What values are you cultivating? And if you are cultivating really good values around, hey, I really want to serve the kingdom of God. I really, I want to build a really strong family. Then and that causes you to continue to feel like where you're at is the right place to reflect those values, then I would continue to do that. But there's been a lot of cases in which somebody, let's say they have decided, I really want to go after my individual values, and they end up on the other side of the country, and then all of a sudden they begin to develop a really strong sense of I like valuing family and wanting to do more and more things integrated with their family. As their values start to shift, now all of a sudden their desires start to shift. Now they're like, I didn't want to live in the Midwest, but all of a sudden I want to move back, that's when I would pay attention when the values shift. But if your values are being well served from where you are, and those are always going to be in tension. There's not just one value. There's like lots of values that are being held in tension. Then on a regular basis, we're your values begin to create desires, and if your desires shift, that's when I oftentimes think, oh, let's entertain this possibility. In our case, one thing that kind of happened to us was, I grew up in the Seattle area, and we ended up moving, to the Cincinnati area. And over the next 15 years of us living here, and we were very isolated when we first moved here from family. And we saw many, I think most of our family members on both sides ended up moving here. And a lot of it was just their values started to shift over time. And so it created kind of this vortex, which was very surprising to us. We did not expect them to move. But yeah, that was, I believe, a result of just different seasons of life create and begin to accentuate new values. Those values give birth to desires that then cause the family to come closer together. So I would pay attention to those if that starts to happen.
Yeah, I mean, because you also have the concept of like leave and cleave, or like John Eldredge talks about the like being fathered by God, and one of the phases is like cowboy, and another is warrior, and it's like there is this like coming into your own. It's just it's so interesting to try to keep it all together through the same lens.
Yeah,
But
definitely. I think one of the things that's challenging is so the leave and cleave. That's from Genesis 2. And one of the things that's really, I think, confusing for modern people about that is that in that context, there was very little leaving that happened for. That's a very like modern idea. And so, what if you actually read that in context? What it's describing there, it says in this way, a man shall leave his father and mother and shall unite to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And then Jesus added to that in the Gospels, they're no longer two but one. What he's talking about there, and the way that was lived out in ancient cultures, was that when a couple would get married, they would actually move into a different house or a different part of the house. Usually it was actually a different part of the house. And the thing that's being emphasized in that passage is the sexual oneness between, and that was an actual big problem for the last, for those millennia, was the fact that oftentimes the family multi-generationally would live in the same tent or the same house. And the Bible actually, you saw this in the story of Isaac. Isaac, when he grew up, he didn't leave his father and mother and become like move to another city. He moved into another tent, and actually describes that when Rebecca came. He then left the tent of his father and mother and moved into his own tent so that he could experience that sexual union with his wife. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to have this enmeshed relationship between the generations. It does mean, I think, that we're really confused about what that actually looks like in a healthy way. And I think that we've gone way too far on the individual side, but I think that there is an overreaction where people start to, where you have maybe grandfathers and grandmothers that think they have a bunch of authority over their adult children and try to control their lives, which I agree. I don't think that's biblical. I think the primary way to envision the relationship between adults in a family is one of honor. It's a culture of honor, not a culture of obedience. And that's what the Bible really emphasizes. But I don't think we've seen that. We don't live in a culture of honor anymore. And so there's a complete confusion now. It's either obedience or it's nothing. And we don't know. And that's why I think, like in Italy, when you go to these ancient cultures, like you were describing, Shawn, that's one of the things I love to go and just experience, especially honor-based cultures that have a memory of what it's like to experience honor between adults in a family, because that's really missing. And without that honor, the relationships get way too wound up and confusing.
Mm.
I feel like I could just sit here and like take it all in for hours. We love this. It's something that our family has been talking about and working on for like intensely, and it's a conversation we talk about almost every day. So I just appreciate it. I appreciate your perspective. I really hope the brokenness of our culture starts to swing back, because family is the greatest. And
Amazing.
I've gotten to experience it firsthand from my family and yours, and being able to like share that with people, I think is important.
Yeah, I'd like to sit down with you again, Jeremy, in person, and we'll probably block off like 3 hours because it's so fascinating. I'm just thinking, I've benefited so much from the side effects of family, like being the middle of 5 kids. We're out in DC or whatever, and I get approached, and I'm like, "Hey, I went to Wheaton with your brother," and then it's like, there's so many more relationship touch points or connections that you have when you have this strong sense of family. Or, at my dad's funeral, it's like an 80-year-old guy approaches me and is like, "Hey, I taught your dad and your grandpa," and like there are like generational relationships too that just hit differently than like, a new budding friendship, which is also beautiful. But it's like the amount of community that family can be a vehicle for, I think, is like really, really powerful. So anyway, I know we're over time. I appreciate you giving us time today.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk more about this. Excited to get the feedback from our listeners. And if you are listening, you want to learn more about Jeremy and his work, he's written several really fascinating books that have kind of inspired Shawn and I to like dig into this. And we are trying to spend as much time being strategic with family as we are with our own personal goals or business goals. And it's honestly, it's more of like a loose, ambiguous, intangible project, but it's so fun. And Shawn and I have, I think, benefited and grown closer together. So anyway, thank you for all that you've done in this field, Jeremy.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, guys.